Hi everyone, I'm Thelma Ross, and I am a wife who is recovering from the effects of Alanon, of alcohol through the principles of Alanon. Hi everyone. I would like to begin by paying tribute to the women who were so influential in the early years of AA. Those of you who know the story about Bill, who had come to Akron, Ohio, with his company in order to complete a business deal. The business deal fell through, and he was very depressed, and he had been left by the rest of the company to do the cleaning up, so to speak, of the affair. And he was all alone, and he was very upset and very depressed. And he looked in the bar and he said, I don't want to go in there. I wish I could find an alcoholic to work with, because he had had this nucleus of an idea forming in his mind back in New York. So he went to the directory in the Mayflower Hotel, and he started looking for the churches and the ministers. And he found a couple, but he didn't get any satisfaction there. He finally found this one. He said, I'm really busy, I can't help you tonight, but I know someone who can. And he said, you call Henrietta Seiberling. She has been working with a man in the Oxford group, and she, I think, will be the one that you need to talk to. He called Henrietta. She said, come out and we will talk. He went out to her home, and it was through Henrietta that he found Dr. Bob, because Dr. Bob was the one that Henrietta had been working with. And so this was the very woman who was responsible for getting these two men together. And of course, as they worked, then AA was developed. In working with Dr. Bob, Anne, who's Dr. Bob's wife, was extremely important, because as she learned about this program and learned what Bill was trying to do, and she said, good, we'll try again. And each time any Dr. Bob or Bill would bring someone home, she said, come on, we've got to try again. That seemed to be her bywords. She was very influential in giving people refuge in her home. And it was women like her who had brought their husbands to AA or to this program, and because she was the one who, like Anne, who started to get her husband to go to the Oxford group, and she was trying to get him there. And it was so often that the wives were trying to get their husbands to do something. She also did an awful lot of 12-step work in her story. Then back in New York, Bill's wife Lois, and she was trying to help in every way she possibly could. And she always said, bring them into the kitchen when Bill would bring them home. Bring them into the kitchen. She'll make some coffee. She would feed them. She would give them comfort, and she would also ask the families to come and give them help and advice. These two women were extremely important in the progress of AA. Those of you who have read the book, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, have read this statement in there, was made, quote, the wives' role was extremely important in the earliest days of AA. It is no exaggeration to say that there would have been no AA without those wives. End of quote. The other woman who was extremely important is Sister Ignatia. As Dr. Bob was trying to work with the alcoholics, he knew that they had to have some hospitalization sometimes. And he did not know quite how to get that accomplished. But with Sister Ignatia, who had been transferred, thank you, to the admissions department of St. Thomas Hospital. And as Dr. Bob talked with her, she realized what a powerful thing he was trying to do. And she would try to find a room when Dr. Bob needed one for his alcoholic friend. It may have been in a closet. In her story and in her book, she tells that sometimes she almost had to hide them away in a closet because some of the administrative personnel did not like it when she was trying to bring these alcoholics into her hospital. But Dr. Bob prevailed, and she prevailed because she tried to help him and find places for him. She tried to find room where the AAs who were sober could come and talk to these people. A lot of times it had to be in a very obscure sort of place in the hospital. But through her efforts, she was always able to help. She was one of the greatest friends that this fellowship will ever know. And she helped many, many alcoholics, and she also realized how much we wives and family needed a program too, and we needed help. Like Ann and Lois brought in the wives and the children to help them understand this disease, for this is a family disease. The family needs to work together. And these women may have remained in the background, but their influences were very strong. Lois and Ann recognized this great need, and together they began the Alanon program in the 1950s. Dr. Brody in Indianapolis, at the time when we came into AA in the early AA years, recognized this need also, because as he talked with each new member, he told them, you bring your family along. They need help too. This is a family disease. So it was in our family. Our family was in very dire straits when we came to this program. Alcohol is not a problem in our home in the early days of our marriage. I had had no experiences with alcohol. None of my family drank in my early years. So I was really very naive about this monster that I was going to become acquainted with. I drank with my husband when we were going out, or I would go with him, until one time after our first child was born. We had been to a party in some friend's house, and of course it was a drinking party, and we had taken our baby along with us. And it finally came time that we better go home. So we got in the car, we started home, but we had to pass his favorite tavern. And he said, I need to stop and get a pack of cigarettes or something. And I thought, well, he'll be gone a few minutes. But the baby and I sat there in the car, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. I have no idea how long, because I had been drinking too, and my head was spinning around, and I really didn't know what time it was. But I knew it was a long, long time that we sat there. But while I was sitting there, something said to me, Thelma, is this the way you want to raise this child? And that sobered me up faster than anything. From then on, that was the beginning of the dividing of our ways. He would go and drink, and I stayed home with our child. So that by the time we came to AA, our marriage was virtually shattered by this alcohol. It had become a way of life full of disappointment, frustration of ambitions, and a compromise of all of our ideals. I think we come to marriage with many ideals and many hopes. And in our marriage, those things were disappearing. Was just one disappointment after another, was full of frustration, trying to figure out what was happening here. And of course, all the ideals that we had when we came to this, that I had when I came to this marriage, were just going by the wayside. We were being held together, really, by the very frailest of threads, a little bit of hope. When we came to AA, I really didn't have too much faith in this. We had tried every other thing we could think of. Every time we would try to solve the problem, we'd try something else. Never worked. This time, there was just a tiny little bit of hope. Well, maybe, but I really don't have too much faith in it. I had a lot of fear because of the way life was going. And we had 2 little girls. As the time went on here, I resented deeply the hours that he spent away from home drinking, and that I had to stay home. I didn't want to be there. And I was a window watcher. Every time he left, and I knew when he was drinking, I would stand at the front door and look out the window. And we lived on a farm, we lived back a long, long lane, and I could see him turn in the drive. And I would watch, and watch, and watch. First I'd think, well, I wish he'd come home. I wanted him to come home. It's time he ought to come home. And then he didn't come home, and I'd think, I don't care if he never comes home. And after a while, I would almost say, I just wish he would run into an abutment in a bridge and kill himself and get him out of my hair. I don't want him around. And he still didn't come home. And pretty soon I would say, oh God, don't let that happen. But the anger grew. Our paths divided further and further. We were just going separate ways all the time. The injuries to both of us began to fester and to multiply. I decided that I was going to try to solve this problem. I was going to make him stay home. So of course I tried all of the things that I shouldn't have tried. So the first one, I would, if there were any beer, if he brought any home, if there was any at all around, I'd pour it down the drain and pour it out. Well, you know what happened? He went uptown and brought some more. So I realized I wasn't accomplishing any that way. When he would lay down and pass out, or in the chair, I would go through his pockets. I'll take all the money away from him, and if he doesn't have any money, he can't go back up and drink anymore. Well, of course, you all know what happened. As soon as he got up, he went back uptown to the tavern, found out he didn't have any money, and he said, "Hey, put it down, I'll pay you next week." So he drank some more and ran up a tab that had to be paid later. That didn't work. I tried taking the keys out of the car. Now, I said we lived back a long lane on a farm, and I'd take the keys out of the car. Okay, he can't go if I've got the keys. So he's not going to go any place, and so fix him. So he gets up, he goes out, he sees the keys are not in the car, and he goes to the barn and gets his tractor. And uptown he went on the tractor. I accomplished nothing that way. I even locked the doors, wouldn't let him in. But you know how long that lasted. He'd bang on the doors until one time the door completely cracked and split, and I decided I better let him in. So that didn't work. I decided that maybe we argued so much, and I decided that if I don't say anything when he comes home, I just won't say a word, because if I say anything, we'll start arguing again, yelling and so on. So I would be tight-lipped. I would not say anything. And of course, we always had this very routine that, you know, we always started this way, and he would say something and I would say something back, and he would say something else, and we just went at it back and forth. And if he said something that I couldn't think of a good retort to, then I'd wait till the next time. But boy, I mulled that over in my mind, and the next time he came up with that, I had a remark to give back to him. And by that time, then he'd think about it a while. And then the next time, I'd come up with my little speech, and then he'd have something else to me, and then trying to hurt one another in every way we could. Trying to accuse one another of things. So I decided I wouldn't talk to him. When he comes in, just won't say anything, then we won't argue. Well, okay, he'd start in, and I wouldn't say anything. He'd say something else, I wouldn't say anything. And he'd go on, but all of a sudden, he pushed the right button. And I exploded, and off we'd go again. So that none of these things worked. Anything that we tried, it was constant bickering, fighting, arguing, anger, growing into hatred, until you just hated to see him come home. And of course, along with everything else, I would leave. I would think, well, you know, if I can't take it anymore, just not going to stay here, not going to put up with this, and maybe if I leave, maybe it'll bring him to his senses and he will understand that things have got to change. Well, I'd leave for an hour, didn't matter. I'd leave for half a day, didn't matter. I'd leave for a day. The longest it kept on, the longest I was ever gone for a week, and that was after we had come to AA. We came to AA in March, but he did not sober up until November. So there was these months in here of still trying to carry on and jockey back and forth and trying desperately to finally learn something. But as I say, this anger of mine just grew and turned into really a hatred. I hated to see him come home. I hated my life where I was living. I didn't like anything about what was going on in my life. It was a miserable mess, and I think of it now as a living hell, because that's what we were going through. Alcohol had twisted my mind and my emotions and my thinking, and I needed to learn to recover my ability to think clearly. I needed a deeper understanding of what alcohol had done to my husband and what it had done to me. We tried so many things, but none of them worked. But we finally decided to take a step in the dark by coming to AA. We had no other place to turn. This was probably the most important step or decision that has ever been made in my life. Now, when we came to AA, there was no Alanon. Now, as I said a while ago, that Lois and Ann decided that Alanon should be started in the early 50s. And it had not gotten over to Indiana yet. But there were a number of groups. In our little group, we attended this Sunday night meeting, which was a step meeting. And that was the open meeting. And we talked about, we did not say anything, really. We were not asked to say anything. But as we talked among ourselves, we realized, the things they're talking about in these steps would help us too. So several of us decided to have a meeting, and we all got together and decided, let's do this. Let's see if we can't meet, and let's see if we can't use these steps, and let's see if we can help ourselves. So we had started a meeting about the same time that Lois and Ann were starting. Apparently a number of other groups were also starting up, because many of the groups were taking the AA steps and they were rearranging them and changing them. And I had several different copies from different groups where they had taken the steps and sort of made them over. And Lois and Ann then found out what was happening in these early days of AA, and this is where they said, hey, this is the way it's going to be. And these steps as we know them today were adopted, and these were the things that had to be done. So there was now some continuity to each of the groups. But when Tom went in March, he bought a big book, and he brought it home. And he laid it down on the table, and he never opened it up. It laid there. Well, of course, I am going to see that this man straightens up. So I take the book, and I read it from cover to cover, and I'm like a sponge almost, because I wanted something so badly to work. I was so sick of this way of living. So I read the big book, and I read it. The beginning of our getting well was when I realized that the big book said, look what I let happen to me, instead of look what the alcoholic has done. And so with this big book, as I read it, and he didn't touch it. So I would say, Tom, I was reading today in the book here on page so-and-so. Now, you ought to read this. This is exactly what's happening. Now, you ought to read this right here. Or else I would read something and I would think, well, he can't read all of that, so I chewed it up, digested it, and fed it back to him in bits and pieces. I was going to straighten this man out. Many times something would happen and I told you now, this is the way it ought to be done. This is what you need to know. I told you so. I finally learned that one of the women in our beginning group there said, you know, I have to learn to keep my mouth shut. And I have to learn to bite my tongue. So I finally learned that after a long time. But instead of saying, I told you so, he would come home on Wednesday night, was a closed meeting, and he would come home on Wednesday night, and something had gone on in that meeting that was important at that time, because he would come home and his eyes were shining. They were dancing. Do you know what went on tonight? Do you know what so-and-so said? And he would tell me. And he was ecstatic with finding out this important information. Now, I could have stood there and said, hey, I told you that 2 weeks ago. Why do you won't listen to me, but you'll listen to them? But I discovered the look on his face, the shining eyes. He had found something beyond me. And I learned to keep my mouth shut. However, I had another very bad fault. I pushed. Now, it's Wednesday night. Are you going to go to meeting tonight? It was 18 miles to Richmond. Are you going to go? Are you clothes? You have what clothes you want to wear? I practically pushed him out the door to go to that meeting on Wednesday night. Now, he had to go past one of his favorite taverns, which always worried me. And if he wasn't back home by a certain time, I knew what had happened, that he had stopped on his way home, because that happened for several nights. But I was pushing with every way I could possibly think of in order to try to make him get this program. Of course, I took his inventory. I called him all kinds of things. I said he was very selfish, he was arrogant, he was irresponsible, he was lacking in appreciation of what I was trying to do for him. I told him about the times he stayed away from home and he didn't know how to handle the money. All those things. I was wrapping myself in self-righteousness right up the river. I tried many means of retaliation, but I soon realized that I was only hurting myself. I was not hurting him at all. One of the things that I did with the big book was to read. See, I had no Alanon literature. There was none at this time. And the only thing that I found was chapter 8 in the big book. And in that chapter 8, every time he went, and I always knew when he was going to go to drink. So I would get the big book and I would start reading chapter 8. And I would read, and I would read, and I would read. Day after day after day, I read chapter 8, chapter 8, I found in there that alcoholism is a twofold disease. Now, I never thought about it. I just thought he was being damn contrary all the time, and he was just doing this because he was tormenting the life out of me. But all of a sudden I realized it says alcoholism is a twofold disease. An allergy of the body coupled with an obsession of the mind. This made me stop and do some thinking. It said we have had a long rendezvous with hurt pride, definitely, frustration, self-pity. I'd always had a lot of problems with self-pity, misunderstanding, all of those things. And I had to learn through chapter 8 by reading it over and over. It was like a textbook because I had to read and read. I read this sentence today and it didn't mean anything. I read it next week and now it had meaning to me. Sometimes you read over things and it's just words. And all of a sudden there will be something that will tell you, I've read that a dozen times, but I never heard it before. And one of those was in chapter 8, and I read it and read it and read it, but one day it stood out, and it said, God has either removed your husband's alcoholic problem or he has not. God has removed the problem. Thelma, you aren't doing it. You are not helping one little bit. You're not going to do this. It says God has either removed your husband's alcoholic problem or he has not. And it made me do a lot of thinking. Also in chapter 8, I learned a number of other things that I was doing wrong. One of them said, try not to condemn. I had done that day after day after day, trying to make him do it my way. So I condemned. Chapter 8 said, build up instead of tearing down. And I was tearing him apart and trying to make myself, in my self-righteousness, I was trying to be the perfect person. And I was tearing him down to make myself look better. I had to stop that. I had to learn not to do that. It said in there to use patience and good temper. Well, my temper was beyond all words. Use patience. And that was very, very hard. Because I wanted it done now. I wanted it done my way. And I had to learn that that's not going to be the way it is. I had to stop all this self-pity. And I had a lot of that. I was bothered with self-pity when I was even in high school. And I had to watch it. And I really always felt so sorry for myself. This summer, when we were battling with this alcohol and battling back and forth, trying to figure out how this is going to get done or if it's going to get done, as I said, we lived back a long lane. I was a woods to the east of us. They planted corn out in front of the house. They planted corn on the west. and in the field in the back. I had corn all around me and a woods on this side. And one day, I was just exasperated, I guess. And I said, Lord, why have you put me down here in this hole? Because I just seemed to be down in a hole with all of this stuff all around me. And I was down in here and I couldn't see any place. And finally it dawned on me, the only way you can see, Thelma, is up. Ask God for help. And I thought, that's the reason I've been put here. I cannot do it myself. I've got to ask God for His help. We had tried church. And our minister was an excellent minister. I liked him very much. And I always seemed, when I went to church, it seemed like the whole weight of the world was on my shoulders. I felt so miserable and so down. And I was to the point where I really didn't care anymore. But in his sermon, he always brought in this one piece of scripture. Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And it seemed like whenever I heard that, it always seemed like that was lifted off my shoulders. And I would come out of church and I would feel so good, so much better, and I would just feel great. But you know what happened? By the time the week was over and I was ready to go back for Sunday, there I was with the world on my shoulders again. But I always looked or listened for that statement, that piece of scripture that he would read, because it always made me feel better. There came a time when Tom had been drinking all day, and he had come home for a little while, but he didn't stay very long. He slept a little bit of it off, and he got up and he went again about 4 o'clock and came after supper, came late at night. I put the children to bed. He still wasn't home. The longer it went, I went through all my little routine of hoping he didn't come home and then afraid he wouldn't. And as I said, I was a window watcher. I put the children to bed and it came time to go to bed late. Usually he always came home. He was never one to be gone overnight or go off for a week at a time. He always would come home at night. And I was waiting for him to come home. He didn't come. I sat on the bed and watched out the window for the car to drive in the lane. Didn't come. And the longer it came, 2 o'clock, he wasn't home. 3 o'clock, he wasn't home. I was hysterical almost, because I thought, maybe he has killed himself someplace. What has happened? Why isn't he coming home? Why won't he be home? Why won't he come home? And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was crying. I was almost hysterical. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I felt a weight on my shoulder as if it were a hand laid on my shoulder. And a voice said to me, "Don't worry, Thelma. Everything's going to be all right." And a calmness came over me, and I laid down, went to sleep. The next morning, He came home about 11 o'clock. And he will tell you what happened there. But as we compared notes later, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when he made his decision to accept AA in its fullest, the first 3 steps. And he has not had a drink since. I used not only chapter 8, but also the Little Red Book. And I don't hear too much of anyone who even reads the Little Red Book anymore. But once in a while I'll hear of someone who has that Little Red Book. And to me, it was a beautiful book. And it helped me tremendously, especially in step 4. Because step 4 was a hard one for me to take. You know, in step 4, it's easy to look the other way and say, you know, and the 12 and 12 was also a good book for me to read when it came out. And in 12 and 12 it says that pride says you need not pass this way. You need not take an inventory. But fear says you dare not look. But you better. But step 4 in the Little Red Book helped me tremendously. This is a living program, and we are talking about acceptance of one another. The bottle is removed, but we need to learn to live together. And we all seek peace of mind, sanity, and love. I am a quilter, and I found this poem. Life is like a quilt. Life is like a patchwork quilt, and each little patch is a day. Some patches are rosy, happy, and bright, and some are dark and gray. But each little patch, as it is fitted in, are sewn to keep it together, makes a finished block in this life of ours, filled with sunshine and rainy weather. So let me work on life's patchwork quilt through the rainy days and the sun, trusting that when I have finished my block, the master will say, well done. Tom and I have spent many 24 hours together in AA and Alanon. And may we continue to seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God and to try to carry the message and practice these principles in all of our affairs and to be of help whenever, wherever we can. And may all of us have many more 24 hours together in AA and in Alanon. And as it is said, let a better world begin with me. Thank you.